Jackpot ang feeling ng iba sa balik.
Akses sa tubig, disenteng tirahan at maayos na kabuhayan. Yan ang mga bagay na karapatan ng bawat isa sa atin. Pero ang mga bagay na dapat natatamasa, tila ba ipinagkakait daw sa mga katutubo sa Bukidnon.
Now, what really is the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain?
What is MOA, AD, or MUAD? It is the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain. It was a proposed peace agreement between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, aimed at resolving ancestral domain rights of the Bangsamoro people. It sought to establish the Bangsamoro Juridical Entity, or the BJE, a political unit with greater autonomy than the existing autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao, granting the Bangsamoro control over their ancestral lands, natural resources, and local governance, while respecting human rights and Philippine sovereignty. Negotiations began in the early 2000s with Malaysia mediating, and the agreement was finalized and initialed in July of 2008, with a planned signing in August of 2008. However, it faced a strong opposition from local government, the indigenous groups, and lawmakers concerned about the potential secession and sovereignty issues. Then the Philippine Supreme Court issued a temporary restraining order and later declared MUAD as unconstitutional due to procedural lapses and sovereignty concerns.
What is the purpose of MOAD? The Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, or the MOAD, aimed to establish a framework that would prioritize the humanitarian and economic needs of the Bangsamoro community. Its purpose was to lay the foundation for the Bangsamoro homeland and address the political aspirations of the Bangsamoro people. The agreement aimed to secure the following, like Bangsamoro people's desire for self-governance through the establishment of the Bangsamoro Juridical Entity, or the BJE, with defined powers like granting the BJE the authority to explore, exploit, use and develop natural resources within its territorial jurisdiction, or establishing a wealth sharing agreement where the BJE receives 75% of the income and revenues derived from resource exploration and development and such. Second, associative relationship with the central government. Third, to secure their identity. Fourth, protect their rights. And lastly, establish a suitable and acceptable system of governance to them as a distinct dominant people. The MOAD outlined concepts and principles, defined territory, addressed resources, and discussed governance.
The MOAD was an agreement between the Philippine government and the MILF to give the Bangsamoro people more control over their ancestral lands here in Mindanao. The Bangsamoro people saw it as a step forward to self-rule. However, it worried other groups, especially the non-Moro indigenous people, like the Lumets, who feared losing their rights to their own land. The Supreme Court eventually stopped the agreement, saying it was unconstitutional, and this led to renewed fighting and displacement here in Mindanao. While the MOAD didn't push through, it made everyone realize how important land, peace, and identity here in the Philippines. It also influenced later peace talks and agreements.
So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Nursaima Ikali. So, today I'm gonna give you an examples of this MOAAD. So, pasensya na kasi nasa hospital tayo ngayon. So, medyo maingay. So, first one is, magbibigay ako ng 4 na examples. So, mayroon tayong tinatawag na displacement of the civilians in 2008. So, example nito is after the Supreme Court stopped the signing of MOAD in August 2008, clashes broke out between the government forces and the MILF commanders. So in the areas like sa North Cotabato, Lanao del Norte, and Maguindanao, and over 600,000 of civilians were displaced. So na-scatter sila. And then, why did it happen? So, ang nangyari ito is some of the MILF fighters felt betrayed by the government's sudden withdrawal of the agreement. And another one is the frustration that lead to armed retaliation and occupation of Christian populated towns. So yun nga. And also, meron din nangyari na conflict. So the conflict was escalated because no ceasefires or safety nets were in place after the MOA EDI was halted. Meron tayong parang matabang examples. Ang second examples is may tinatawag tayong outrage from local government officials and indigenous people. So, ang example nito is many local official at saka indigenous people or IPs ay in the areas to be included in the proposed Bangsamoro Juridical Entity or BGE ang tawag natin dito, is strongly opposed of the MOA-ED. For the examples, officials in Zamboanga City rejected the idea of inclusion without the consultation. So why it happened? Bakit nga ba nangyari ito? So the lack of transparency and public consultation lead people to believe that their lands would be included without their consent. And another one is the IP feared loss of ancestral lands and the culture autonomy under the MILF-LIDA BGE. And then the Christian settlers were afraid, natakot sila, of being governed under the Muslim majority legal framework. So, natakot yung mga Christian brothers natin na baka pamunuan sila ng mga Muslim people. So, kaya nangyari yun. So, meron tayong pangatlong example. So, ang pangatlong nating example is meron tayong tinatawag ni Supreme Court ruling of the unconstitutionality. So, example is noong October 2008, this Supreme Court ruled the MOA-ED unconstitutional due to the violation of the principle of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the requirement of the public consultation. So why it happened? So the agreement was seen as giving us quasi-independence to a part of the Philippines. And another one is the BGE. The BGE would have had its own police, legal system, and the control over the resources power similar to separate the state. And then this violated the 1987 Constitution, which does not allow the creation of the separate entity without the constitutional amendments of the public codes. So, meron tayong pang-apat na example. So, ito na yung last example natin. So, the last one was called peace process delay. So, example ito is due to the failure of the MOA-ED. Peace talks were suspended and the trust between the government and the MILF weakened. So, it took several more years for the both sides reassume formal negotiation. So, why it happened? So, the violence and the backlash of the MOA-ED depressed division. And then the government had to rebuild the peace framework that would be accepted by all stakeholders, the MILF, the IPs, and the Christian and also the LGUs. So eventually, this led to a framework agreement of the Bangsamoro FAB in 2012 and the Bangsamoro Organic Law or the BOL in 2018.
In conclusion, the MOA-ED or the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain was an agreement that the government and a group called MILF tried to make to help bring peace to Mindanao by giving the Bangsamoro people more control over their land and how they live. It was supposed to let them have their own leaders and rulers in the area. But many people like mayors and indigenous groups were upset because they weren't asked about it. and they were scared of losing their own homes. So, the Supreme Court stopped it, saying it didn't follow the law. Even though it didn't work, the MOA helped people learn how to make better peace agreements later, which led to the creation of a new peaceful region called BAR.
Now I understand. The MOA wasn't just about land or power. It was about giving the Bangsamoro people a voice, a chance to be heard, to lead, and to live with dignity in their own homeland. Even if it didn't succeed, it provided everyone the real conversation about peace. And maybe, just maybe, that was just the first real step towards a better future for everyone, especially for those who were affected.